In this third video, we're going to talk about a remedy for shame. And as discussed in the other videos, shame thrives on secrecy and shame thrives on silence. So the more that we shine a big light on it and expose shame, the harder it is for it to maintain its powerful grip over us. In the individual counselling that I do and the group work that I facilitate, we learn how to install and program a radar. And this new radar will help us to be able to pick up a shame troll long before it blindsides us. And the beauty of this is that we learn how to catch ourselves. So instead of reacting as per usual without much control over the situation, you learn how to respond instead. And that's like learning how to neutralise instead of inflame a situation. And that puts you much more in the driving seat. And one of the keys to know how to do this is knowing what our triggers are. And that's one of the things that you learn. So if we go back to the checkout situation from the second video, which is where you've got to the checkout, your goods have all gone through, you've handed over your credit card, and the machine says insufficient funds, and this leads to a meltdown. If we take that situation and we know then that our trigger is being questioned about money, and then this leads to the appearance of our shame troll for money. So on top of knowing that it's our shame troll for money, if we add in some critical awareness and some self-compassion and a few other things that you'll learn, we learn how to switch having a meltdown into a situation that would be much more like, this is uncomfortable, but I'm okay. And the thought that would be going through your head will be much more along the lines of, I know this account has got money in it. I wonder why this card is not working, and I wonder if there's an error or a fault with the machine. So this is a great turnaround, because prior to that we would have thought that the error or the fault was with us. So even in that situation then, if you didn't have another card, for instance, and there still was no money in your account and you had no money to pay for your goods and you had to leave them behind, the trip home in the car would be very different. So instead of being angry at yourself and for being an idiot and a failure, you may well be angry and frustrated, but it would be more likely to be at the technology or perhaps at the vagaries of modern living, but not at yourself for being a failure. So you can see that with learning, we can end up with a completely different outcome, and that leads to a lot more ease in our lives. So there are a number of shame categories, and money is just one of them. Some of the others are body image, sex, parenting skills, religion, being stereotyped, just to name a few. And as I've said before in the other videos, we will never be 100% shame-free, so that's a given. But if we practice what it is that we've learned, and the more that we take charge of and challenge our own beliefs and our own behaviours, the smaller that our shame trolls will become. One of the marvellous things about group work is watching the peeling away of that feeling that I am totally alone, that no one else knows how awful or flawed I feel. And that starts to be replaced with, oh my God, you too. So no matter what our shame story is, and in fact the details of that story are less important than what the underlying triggers are. So there are no prizes for best or worst shame story, and comparing ourselves to others kind of becomes a non-issue, because what's real for you is real for you, and if that's what's stopping you from moving forward, then that's what you need to deal with. Because there is no hierarchy of shameworthiness. Let me give you a couple of examples. So if Nick's wife has died versus Fred's been caught for hard drugs and has done some prison time, versus me, who just doesn't seem to be able to find a partner or the right job perhaps. But you know, like, if that's what's keeping you stuck, then that's not trivial, and it is most definitely worthy of your attention. And what I generally find is that underneath that story would be a shared emotion that everybody in the group would be able to relate to. Another vital component of this work is making friends with vulnerability. Now, I, like most people, could hardly say the word before I started therapy myself. I used to have to refer to it as the V word and look for exits in the room. So it was like it was the scariest word in the English language, and more frightening to have an experience of it. And even though today we're not exactly BFFs, I'm kind of more okay with it. And I've discovered that it takes far less emotional and physical energy to be vulnerable than not to be. And that the group experience lends itself perfectly for dealing with this issue. Always the hardest part is to gather up the courage to sign up for a group work or to ring up about some individual counselling. And then it's also hard to get yourself to be able to get to the first session and sit through the first session, and maybe the second one. But after that, what you'll find is that you create a bond with the other group members or your counsellor. And then this feeling of trust begins and starts to build. Then it feels safer for you to be able to share whatever it is that's going on for you at the time. And it's in those moments when you start to share and you start to feel safer, that you actually start to see the walls that you have constructed so long ago begin to crack. And in the light that begins to shine through these cracks, you begin to see a little bit of hope. Or you begin to see that part of you that was lost. And much to your relief, you will begin to see a way forward. So let me give you a little bit of feedback that I had recently from the last group that we ran. This ignited something within me. What a relief. I don't feel so on the outside now. I feel more real. Wow, it's not just me. It's so liberating to see myself and other things in a different light. Sharing with others in a group setting helped me feel more connected and not so alone. So, if group work is not for you, then individual counselling can be just as helpful. Perhaps it's important finding somebody that's up on shame work, and maybe someone who has an understanding of the Brene Brown idea of shame. But perhaps you're still just in that research phase. So what I'd like to say that what's important here is that you acknowledge that change needs to take place. Then commit to yourself to being open and commit yourself to find whatever the right avenue is going to be for you to start the process. And you don't need to wait for anyone else's permission, because this is about you and what's going to be right for you to start this process. And remember that it's going to be a scary experience. But you know, when I started the process many years ago, what I found was that underneath it was this tiny little feeling of hope and expectation. And perhaps there was this excitement there that things were about to change, that I found to be quite empowering. And the more that I researched and the more help that I got, the more empowered I became. And once I started this healing process, what surprised me was then, and still now, was how much the universe kind of lines up behind you, and it keeps pointing you in the right direction. And since I started, I've never looked back. And yeah, you know, I still have a way to go, and I still have a lot of really tricky moments, and gee, the odd shame troll still jumps up and grabs me. But I live a much more wholehearted life, a much more real and a much more authentic life. And this is where I'm learning that it is so much easier to be myself than any of the edited versions that I tried to create before. And that, flaws and all, really, I know that I am enough, and that this is what it is to be human. So take a chance on yourself. And my bet is that you will discover that there's absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain.